Well, thanks for joining us for this edition of Agri-Pulse Meet the Farmhands, joined today by Randy Russell of the Russell Group. Randy, thanks for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
For starters, can you give us a little bit of an idea of the timeline of your career throughout Washington, places you've been, jobs you've worked, all the way, as far back as you'd like to go, all the way up to the present?
How much time you got?
We got time.
You know, Spencer, my first job was actually in ERS back in, after I got out of school in 1973 at George Mason University. I couldn't find a job. I was coaching baseball, and just really through a happen chance meeting, I met a guy by the name of Abner Womack. And Abner was a PhD ag economist at USDA, and we started talking, and he said he had a job, and I told him I didn't have one, and he interviewed me, and I ended up getting a part-time GS 5 job, staff economist job at ERS. And Abner at that time ran the forecast support group and the economic research service. And so I worked there a couple of years. Abner later moved back to the University of Missouri and started the Food Ag Policy Research Institute, FAPRI. So very well respected economist. That was a great opportunity for me. Then I went up to Capitol Hill, worked for Senator Helms on the minority staff of the Senate Ag Committee for a short while. And a new senator from the state of Minnesota had just gotten elected, Rudy Boschwitz, Republican, and worked for him for a couple of years. Had a great experience with him and remain dear friends with him to this day. And then back in 1981, when Reagan was elected, I got a chance to go in the administration. Was Farm Bill coordinator in 1981. Stayed there through Part 82. Moved out to Minneapolis and was director of government relations for Pillsbury. Then moved back here and took a job at the National Council of Farmer Co-ops. And then joined the administration again as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in 1984, and then in 1985 became Chief of Staff for Secretary Block. I left shortly thereafter and have been in this firm for, actually just celebrated my 30th year in January.
So kind of a laundry list of positions, both in Washington, also a stint in Minnesota. What would you say, of all of those stops, which would you say was kind of the most influential and most beneficial for the job you have now?
You know, Spencer, I would say one of the things I've really been blessed with, and that is having people that invested in my career, and sometimes I kind of ask myself, I don't know quite why they did and what they saw in me that I didn't see in myself. But Abner Womack, Rudy Boschwitz, Jack Block, who was the best boss I ever had, Bill Lesher, who was my longtime partner and mentor, people like that really invested in my career, took time, energy, and effort to advise me on all kinds of things for my career and also personally. But I would say probably the job that I love the most was being Chief of Staff at USDA. You know, I was blessed at a young age to be in that. I was named when I was 28, and I had the job when I was 29. That's a little bit unusual. Jack showed great faith in me by putting me in there. I wasn't quite sure I was ready for it, but it was a great experience, but a very difficult time. As you know, that was when we were right in the throes of a very, very deep farm recession, damn near a depression. Certainly the closest to the depression we've had in a long time. So it was a real challenge. We were doing a farm bill. We had, you know, asset values in agriculture had fallen by 30% during that period. We had the farm credit system that needed a bailout at that time. So it was a very difficult period, but I learned more in that 1 year that I was Chief of Staff than that was a great learning experience for me.
So had it not been for that original job with ERS, I mean, would you have maybe ventured into a different policy arena other than agriculture, do you think?
You know, Spencer, I had deep ties family-wise to agriculture, and we'd go back to North Dakota every year. So I had an uncle that ran AgsCo in North Dakota that at one time was the largest agricultural supply company in North Dakota. So a lot of folks in and around agriculture. But like I said, I grew up in this area, generation removed. And to be honest, I had my pursuit, at least when I was in high school and early college, was to become a professional baseball player. So actually had a chance to sign with the Orioles when I got out of high school and turned it down because my dad was sick and I wanted to stay in the area. So I went on a baseball scholarship to George Mason. And so that's why I kind of I pursued that, was actually coaching at the time when I talked to Abner. So it just circumstances led me to ERS, and off I went.
All right. And now you're at the Russell Group. Before we dive into some questions about that, can you just kind of give us a 30,000-foot view on the Russell Group? I mean,
Sure.
Your staff, your clientele, things of that nature.
Absolutely. So we've been in business for 31 years. Started on March 4th, 1985 by Dick Ling and Bill Lesher. And Dick, as you know, was Secretary of Agriculture. Now that happened after he left the firm. He had been Governor Reagan's Director of Food and Agriculture in the state of California, had been President of the American Meat Institute, very well respected, wonderful mentor to me and to so many other people. And Bill was a friend of mine. We had worked together up on Capitol Hill. He had worked for Senator Lugar and the Ag Committee staff, and then was an Assistant Secretary for Economics. So they started the firm. I joined it 10 months later. We were Ling and Lesher, and then we were Lesher and Associates, and we've gone through different derivations. And then Bill retired a few years ago, now lives in California. But our clientele has stayed, it's grown, it's changed, but we're all food and ag, from producers all the way up to retailers. So we represent the likes of the California Rice Commission, and then the other end of the spectrum would be 7-Eleven, convenience stores, the Grocery Manufacturers International Dairy Foods Association, Kraft Heinz, Cargill, Monsanto, Zoetis, just to name a few, PepsiCo. We've really been blessed with great clients. Many of them have been with us for 10, 15, 20 years in some cases. In the case of Cargill, that was the very first client I brought in, and they've been with us for 30 years. So our philosophy really is to try to build long-term relationships with our clients and to become a key partner with them, both with their Washington office and with their management, and I think that's proven successful.
Okay, and let's get into a little bit of the work that you guys have done. You personally have been given a lot of credit in terms of the GMO labeling debate that just sort of wrapped up. I mean, it's still going to be ongoing in the federal rulemaking, but a bill was produced, it was passed out of both chambers, sent to the White House and signed, and now the debate goes to the USDA rulemaking. But you've been given a good deal of credit for getting that bill over the finish line. For a while, the joke was that they were waiting for the white smoke to come out of the Russell building, and the understanding in the industry was the joke was that, is it out of the Russell Senate office building or out of your offices here? But what was it like being in the center or in the throes of that debate? Because you could argue that's one of the most important agricultural issues of a generation, and you were kind of in the center of it.
Well, Spencer, I feel like that I've been in this realm professionally for 39 years. And I think many of the things that I've learned were tested during this process over the last 2 years to get this bill. Look, this was singularly the most difficult task that I was involved with, but it was a great team effort. I mean, we have people here, Andrew Harger in our office, that played an instrumental role. We had 54 national trade associations that were involved. We had a lot of state and local affiliates and companies and co-ops and seed dealers and biotech providers that were all involved. So it was an enormous team effort. I got to tell you, there were a lot of times that even people within our coalition, I think, thought the cart that was in the ditch was never coming out. But I really felt, when I took this on, I knew it was going to be difficult, maybe not quite as difficult as it turned out to be, but I also knew how important it was. And it wasn't just important because of biotech, and that is an extremely important issue, so don't get me wrong there, but I think it was important for the ag and food industry. You know, after what we went through in the 2014 Farm Bill, where we faced a defeat of our Farm Bill on the House floor, that was kind of a low point for our industry. And I think it was really important for our industry to understand that when they work together, they work cooperatively, that they all put their shoulder to the flywheel, working in sync, they can be highly effective. When they go off in different directions and we form a firing line in a circle, the outcome's not so pretty. And so I think that we've got a little bounce back in our step as a community, and I think it's going to be very helpful going into the next Farm Bill.
And another story I heard in doing some research for this piece was one surrounding the country of origin labeling debate. And the way the story is shaped is that at the time, then Chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, Colin Peterson, essentially ordered Tom Bias, who then was the president of National Farmers Union, and yourself to get in a room and don't come out until you've got a compromise. I mean, is that how the story works from your end as well?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the gist of it. I mean, look, what had happened was is that Colin Peterson, a dear friend, called Tom Bias in, and Tom at that time was president of the National Farmers Union, later to go on to head up Growth Energy. And I knew Tom very well. And he basically had us representing each side come to the table and negotiate. So we went through a series of weeks of negotiation. We spent a lot of high quality time together, came up with a package. It was still mandatory country of origin labeling, but frankly was much better from an economic perspective than the original 2002 provision. So ultimately, though, that was what was repealed here not too long ago. There was some rulemakings that were done relative to that too that were challenged by the WTO and ultimately were lost in the WTO, and that led to the repeal.
Do you think there's a difference in terms of strategies that might work today versus even, I mean, that was only about 10 years ago or less. I mean, do you think there's a difference in lobbying or government relations strategies that could work in today's political environment that maybe wouldn't have worked 10, 15, 20 years ago and vice versa?
Well, I think in the case of the biotech issue, in the case of mandatory country of origin labeling, there were well-defined groups, for or against or whatever you might call it, and there were people that were leading those efforts. So it made it a little bit easier to say, okay, get in a room and work out a compromise. In the case of the biotech disclosure, Secretary Vilsack played a very critical role, and he called in both sides, as you know, and you're well aware of because you guys covered it quite well, I might add. But he had us in there for 7.5 hours over two days of meetings. And I'm going to be honest, I think he got very frustrated with us. And I think sometimes he probably doesn't quite realize how important those meetings were because it narrowed the differences, at least amongst people that truly wanted to find a middle ground. So he played a very instrumental role. But again, it works when you have well-defined sides, so to speak, and leadership for both sides. Some issues don't lend itself to that. In the case of country of origin labeling, I think Colin realized there were well-defined sides. Here are the two people that he trusted, that others trusted, and that could reach a compromise. And so that's what they did.
Now, outside of your professional career and your lobbying interests, I also understand you have some eggs in the nonprofit basket as well.
Yes.
And that you spend some time away from your professional capacity working with some nonprofits. Can you kind of just give us an idea of the time spent doing that?
I do, Spencer. I grew up in a family where, my parents didn't preach volunteerism, they just did it. And it was just expected. It was part of what you did to give back. My mother was active in a lot of different things, as my father was as well. And I've tried to kind of follow in that footsteps. I was very active when I was in my 30s in the Big Brothers program. I was a Big Brother for years. In fact, my little brother, when he and I got matched, he was born here, but his parents were from Ghana. And he and I were matched when he was 11 years old. He's now 37, and he's getting married over the Veterans Day weekend, and I'm honored to be in his wedding. He's now a prosecutor in Arizona. Great young man, part of our family. So I was on the national area board for the Big Brothers Big Sisters. I was president of the Northern Virginia Council for years. Also been very active in the global hunger issue. I've been on the board of the World Food Program USA since I think it was around 2003 I got on the board. I've been on the executive committee for a long time. I was chairman of the board for a long time. And it's a great organization. I mean, you travel around the world, you go to places like Malawi or the slums of Kibera outside of Nairobi. You realize how blessed you are. And you also realize how generous the United States truly is. I mean, if you want to see the best form of really foreign diplomacy and foreign aid, it's when you go to these godforsaken places where people are dying from malnutrition, and you'll see a bag that says USA, USAID, USDA with the stars and stripes on it. It may be rice, it may be wheat, corn, it may be wheat, it may be corn, soybean blend. And these young kids and these mothers love the United States because it's keeping them alive. Mm-hmm. So I've been very active in that. My wife and I have been very active on adoption-related issues because we have 6 kids, but our 3 youngest are adopted from China. And so we've been very active on foreign adoption issues as well as domestic adoption issues. So we've got a lot of interest. And one of the great things about being in a job like I'm in here in Washington is the relationships you have, and you can use that for a lot of good, and I've tried to do that.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of good, worthy causes out there in the world. When you're choosing how you want to spend your private, personal time advocating for some of these nonprofits, what's that decision-making process like? Because I imagine for as many causes as you've worked on, there's probably a couple that you haven't that you might like to. I mean, how do you decide where to allocate your time in such a matter?
Well, I think the first thing is I try to look for something that I'm passionate about, and my wife and I, in the case of adoption, we actually didn't just set out to adopt our first daughter from China. It was a very unique adoption where, and I won't go into all the details, but the bottom line is that our daughter was actually getting adopted by somebody else, and the mom asked my wife to go with her to China, and when they got over there, the woman just fell apart emotionally and was going to leave the baby, and my wife basically looked her in the eye and said, "The hell you're going to leave her there." And she called me from China and said, "What do you think about adopting?" And at that point we were empty nesters because our 3 oldest kids had all moved on. And I said, "Bring her home." So we brought her back here. They waived their rights to her, and we adopted her. And that's our daughter now, Lily, who'll be a senior in high school this year. And we're looking at colleges. And then we went and kind of went the more traditional way on when we adopted Jaden, who's going to be a 7th grader this year, and Daisy, who's a 2nd grader. So we have in our family from 37 to 7, age-wise. It's a tad bit unusual, but we love kids and we've enjoyed every minute of it.
I also understand that you and the family are owners of a farm in Virginia where you run some alpacas?
We do. About 2 years ago, Spencer, we bought a little place out in Round Hill, Virginia, which is west of Percival. For those that aren't so familiar with Virginia, on kind of the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Beautiful place. It's just 15 acres, but we've got 14 alpacas. We just had our first bred and born cria that came about 2 months ago. Max, he's doing great. And it's really, it's been a lot of fun for my kids. It's been great for us. It's a little retreat. This business, it can be difficult. It's time consuming. You spend a lot of hours at it. Really, for the last 2 years that we've been working on this biotech disclosure, there hasn't been a free weekend in 2 years. There hasn't been something that hasn't come up. It happens at night, it happens in the morning. And when you sign up to kind of lead an effort like this, you're either all in or you shouldn't do it. And so having a place like that where you can get away a bit on the weekend, and it's only 45 minutes from our house, it helps kind of revitalize you every weekend, which I think we all need.
Mm-hmm. And I'll wrap up with this one. If you could give a piece of advice to the younger version of Randy Russell who took that job with ERS and really began his path through the course of agriculture policy, what would that advice be?
I'll tell you a funny story. When I got my job at ERS, I showed up the first day. They didn't have a place for me to sit, so they put a government-issued desk, metal desk, out in the hallway. Well, most people would be kind of embarrassed by that, and I probably was the first day, but I quickly came to realize that my government-issued desk sat right across from the men's room. And at that time in ERS, virtually every ag economist was a male. Now that's changed dramatically, and that's for the better. But at that time they were. So guess what? Every time they had to go to the bathroom, they had to walk by my desk. So who did I get to know? Interesting, the contacts you make. Ken Farrell was the administrator at that time. He later became the head of the California Ag System. J.B. Penn, was the associate administrator, the number 2. JB went to Sparks after he left, then with Informa, then became undersecretary at USDA and chief economist at John Deere. Keith Collins, who was the chief economist at USDA at that time, was a cotton analyst in ERS. I have mentioned to you about Abner Womack that went to FAPRI. Wayne Boutwell was our next immediate superior. He went up to be Senator Cochran's first ag assistant. Later ran the National Council of Farmer Co-ops. Later became CEO of Southern States. So there was a whole series of people that I got to know because my government-issued desk happened to be right across the hallway from the men's room. But it's a bit a joke, but the reality of it is this town's about relationships. Those are near and dear to me. I put great value on them. So if I really had to give advice to younger people, you got to blaze your own path. You do it your own way. But probably 3 things. 1, hitch yourself up to a thoroughbred. A lot of times younger people are very focused on how much they're going to get paid and the other benefits that they may get. If you really look at the things that are most important, it's the experiences that you're going to have and what you learn from the people that you're working for. And who you work for in this town matters. It matters professionally, it matters from an integrity perspective, it matters from a knowledge and wisdom perspective. And if I was giving advice to young people, it'd be hitch yourself up to somebody that's a thoroughbred, that is well known, that you can learn from. And it really doesn't matter how much they pay you in the initial job, because the net present value of that investment is worth a lifetime to you. And finally, I would say probably talk half as much and listen twice as much. This town's full of a lot of people that talk. And when I go into a meeting, one of the things you have to do is you have to be able to read a meeting. You have to read the players, but you also have to be a listener. And if you really want to gain insight about what the next steps are, you don't do it with your mouth, you do it with your ears. One last point. In the era of social media, it seems like everybody comments about everything today. And one thing that Dick Ling always taught me and others, if you have something sensitive to write, whether it's a policy paper or it's a memo to somebody or a tough issue to deal with, write it down, put it in your top desk drawer. Now this was before computers were big. Come back the next day, read it, and if you still feel the same way, send it. And in this era today where people are tweeting all the time, and I'm not in the news media, you need to do that, and I understand that. But there's a lot of things said that I think in retrospect probably shouldn't be said, and in hindsight wouldn't have been said. And I think taking a little pause before you put things out on social media or put things in an email, I think is a wise thing.
Randy, thanks for joining us.
Spencer, my pleasure.